Hi, I'm Kelly Mustian. I'm happy to have been invited by the Mooresville Public Library to take part in their celebration of National Library Week and to tell you a little about my new novel, The Girls in the Stilt House. The Mooresville Library is one of my local libraries, and before the COVID-19 crisis, I was a volunteer genealogist in their special collections room, so it's especially nice to be able to do this with them. Since I couldn't be at the library today, the staff has given me a few questions to answer, but I'll tell you a little bit about the book first. It's Southern fiction set in Mississippi in the 1920s, mostly on a secluded bald cypress swamp on the historic Natchez Trace. The story is about two young women, still teenagers, whose lives become entangled by a murder that puts them both in danger. And there's a secret history that connects the girls as well, that only one of them knows about. Ada grew up in a stilt house on the swamp with a hard-drinking trapper father. She runs away with a fiddler from a traveling carnival and lives in Baton Rouge for a year, but eventually she finds herself alone with nowhere to go but back to the swamp. And when something sets her father off and he takes a violent turn, Ada is saved by a stranger who seems to appear out of nowhere in the middle of the night. The stranger is Matilda. She's the daughter of sharecroppers from the other side of the trace and from across the racial divide. The two girls hide Ada's father's body in an old broken brick tomb in the woods, and they set up housekeeping together. After a while, Ada begins to have questions about why Matilda was in the woods behind the stilt house the night her father died, and Matilda doesn't offer any answers. There are mysteries and questionable motives, a couple of nasty villains and some quiet heroes, some unexpected twists and turns. It's a story about loss and hardship and danger in the Prohibition-era South, but it's ultimately about hope and about finding one's way. One of the questions the library staff sent to me was, when did you realize you wanted to be a writer? I loved stories from the beginning. As a little girl, I loved listening to elderly people tell stories about their own childhoods. And then, of course, books opened up a whole world of stories. I think maybe the first time I thought that I'd like to become a writer was when I read The Grapes of Wrath. It was my older brother's book, and I probably read it to impress him. But I think that was the first time I noticed the beauty of the language itself in a book, rather than just being caught up in a story. That love of beautiful prose stuck, and after I got a lot of really awful adolescent poetry out of my system, I started working on writing fiction. Another question is, what surprised you most about writing your book? One surprising thing for sure was the Southern voices and the old sayings that came back to me as I was writing this book. I left Mississippi at 19, and I've lived in almost a dozen states around the country since then. But as I was writing these characters, I could hear snatches of those old voices I used to listen to as a child. That's how I knew things like the old saying, when it rains while the sun's shining, the devil's beating his wife. I just read that phrase too in Natasha Trethewey's new memoir, Memorial Drive, so I guess it's true. And somehow I remembered that people living out in the country before my time would sometimes turn a chair upside down on their porch to let people know they weren't home, to save them the trouble of going on down the driveway and knocking on the door, I guess. And I put that in the book. So remembering all that so easily was definitely a surprise. And the last question is, what inspired you to write the book? Back in Mississippi, when I was a kid, I used to tag along with my adult sister to overgrown cemeteries in the woods, some of them on the trace, looking for ancestors. And the image of an old broken brick tomb with a cracked lid stayed with me. And that's where I began with this book, Ada and Matilda, hiding a body in an old broken tomb in the woods. From there, the story took off. So once again, I'm grateful to the Mooresville Public Library for inviting me to participate in this program, and to everyone who has watched this online. I hope some of you will pick up a copy of The Girls in the Stilt House at your local library. Thank you.